The sun had just begun to set behind the tall windows of Thornfield Music Hall, casting long golden beams across the polished wooden floors. The last few staff members were heading home for the day, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. Only Elena Vasquez remained, moving silently between the rows of velvet seats with her cleaning cart. At 32, Elena had been working as a custodian at the prestigious music hall for 7 years. She was known among the staff for her quiet nature and thorough work. What nobody knew was how much she looked forward to these peaceful moments alone in the concert hall each evening. The room housed 3 grand pianos, including the crown jewel, a magnificent Steinway worth more than Elena would earn in 15 years of cleaning. As she dusted the black glossy surface, she was careful not to leave even the slightest fingerprint. The piano deserved that respect. Another day, another dollar, she whispered to herself, glancing at her watch. It was nearly 8 in the evening, and she still had the backstage areas to clean before she could catch the last bus home. Elena moved around the main piano on the stage, her mind drifting as she worked. Tomorrow night would be the biggest event of the season. Viktor Kozlov, the Russian piano genius, would be performing to a sold-out crowd. Tickets had been gone within hours of being released, some selling for thousands of dollars. Elena had overheard the event manager saying that people were flying in from other countries just to hear him play. She would be here, of course, but hidden away, cleaning bathrooms while the music played through the building's speakers. It wasn't the same as sitting in those expensive seats, but it was better than nothing. Elena paused her work and looked around. The hall was completely empty now. The security guard wouldn't make his rounds for another half hour. She bit her lip, fighting with herself for a moment, before carefully setting down her cleaning cloth. Her heart pounded as she moved to the piano bench and sat down, not touching the keys, just feeling the smoothness of the bench beneath her. She lifted her hands, holding them just above the keys, not quite making contact. If anyone from management saw her this close to the piano, she'd lose her job instantly, but no one was here. Elena closed her eyes, imagining the sound as her fingers moved silently through the air above the keyboard. In her mind, she was playing Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece she had memorized by watching countless pianists perform it on this very stage. A sound from the hallway startled her, and Elena jumped up from the bench as if it had suddenly caught fire. She quickly grabbed her cleaning cloth and pretended to be dusting the side of the piano, when the night security guard, Pete, poked his head through the door. "Still here, Elena? You're working late again," he said with a friendly nod. "Just finishing up," she replied, her heart still racing. "The hall needs to be perfect for tomorrow's big show." Pete nodded. "Don't work too hard." Good night," she answered, waiting until his footsteps faded before letting out a long breath. Back in the safety of her tiny apartment an hour later, Elena made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window that overlooked the busy street below. From a drawer in her small desk, she pulled out a worn piece of paper, a piano keyboard drawn in pencil, the keys slightly smudged from years of use. Most people would have laughed at the paper keyboard, but it had been Elena's most prized possession since she was 10 years old. She placed it on the desk and began to silently practice the piece she had been imagining earlier, her fingers pressing down on the paper keys with practiced precision. Music had been Elena's first love. Growing up in a small village 3 hours outside the city, her grandmother had taught her to play on an old upright piano that had been in their family for generations. Elena had shown natural talent, quickly learning to play by ear before her grandmother taught her to read music. Those had been happy days, sitting beside her grandmother on the bench, the smell of cinnamon and flour from the morning's baking still hanging in the air, learning the language of notes and rhythms that seemed to make perfect sense to her young mind. "You have a gift," her grandmother would say, "a rare gift that must be shared with the world." But then life had taken an unexpected turn. When Elena was 16, her father lost his job at the factory, and soon after her grandmother fell ill. The medical bills piled up, and the piano, the beloved family piano, had to be sold to help pay for treatment. Even that hadn't been enough. Her grandmother passed away 6 months later, and the family fell into deeper financial trouble. Elena's dreams of music school vanished like morning mist. Instead of auditions and recitals, she found herself taking any job she could find to help support her family. Years passed. Her parents eventually moved to be closer to her uncle's farm, but Elena stayed in the city, working various jobs before landing the position at Thornfield Music Hall. It wasn't the life she had dreamed of, but being close to music, even as an observer, gave her a sense of peace. Elena sipped her tea, now lukewarm, and gazed out at the city lights. She had made peace with her life, or so she told herself. Yet there were moments like tonight when the longing to play became almost painful. Morning came too soon. Elena dragged herself out of bed after a restless night filled with dreams of pianos and concert halls. Today would be extra busy with preparations for the evening's performance. She arrived at work early, wanting to get a head start. The hall was already buzzing with activity, technicians checking sound equipment, florists arranging elaborate displays for the lobby, caterers preparing for the pre-show reception for VIP guests. "Elena, thank goodness you're here," said Diane, the event coordinator, rushing over with a clipboard. "There was a spill in the east corridor and we need it cleaned before the rehearsal starts in an hour." Elena nodded and headed for the supply closet. As she worked, various staff members hurried past, none of them sparing her a glance. She was part of the background, invisible unless needed. By noon, the anticipation in the building was palpable. Elena had just finished polishing the brass railings in the main lobby when the front doors opened, and a flurry of activity announced the arrival of Viktor Kozlov himself. Elena paused her work, watching from a distance as the famous pianist entered, surrounded by an entourage of managers and assistants. He moved with the confident air of someone accustomed to being the center of attention, tall and imposing with salt and pepper hair and an expensive wool coat despite the mild weather. The acoustics had better be perfect this time, she overheard him saying to the hall manager. "Last year in Vienna was a disaster. I won't have a repeat of that." Elena couldn't help but stare. She had seen his performances online countless times, had studied the way his hands moved across the keys, had even practiced some of his simpler pieces on her paper keyboard. Seeing him in person was like seeing a character from a book suddenly step into real life. When the group moved toward the main hall for the sound check, Elena found herself following at a discreet distance, cloth and polish bottle still in hand. She slipped into the hall and positioned herself in the last row, pretending to clean while watching Kozlov take his place at the piano. The first notes filled the room, and Elena closed her eyes briefly, letting the music wash over her. He was playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the piece he would be performing that evening. His fingers moved with such speed and precision that they almost blurred. For nearly an hour, Elena remained in the back of the hall, cleaning the same armrest over and over as she watched the rehearsal. When Kozlov finally stood from the piano, seemingly satisfied, she quickly slipped out and returned to her regular duties. The afternoon raced by. Elena was assigned to help prepare the reception room, where important guests would gather before the show. She set up tables, arranged chairs, and made sure everything was spotless. "The governor is coming tonight," she overheard one of the event staff saying, "and the CEO of Capital Investments. This is a big deal. Kozlov doesn't do many public performances anymore." Elena worked tirelessly, yet her mind kept returning to the music she had heard during the rehearsal. There had been a moment when Kozlov had stopped mid-piece, dissatisfied with something only he could hear, and had the technicians make minute adjustments to the microphones. His attention to detail, his insistence on perfection, she understood it completely. As evening approached, Elena was instructed to make herself scarce once guests began to arrive. She would be needed for cleanup afterward, but during the event she was to remain out of sight. This was normal for events like this, where the wealthy patrons who kept the hall operating weren't reminded of the people who kept it clean. Elena retreated to the small break room used by the custodial staff, eating her simple dinner of a sandwich and an apple, while the sounds of the arriving crowd drifted through the building. Soon she would hear the music again, even if only through the walls. Little did she know that in a few short hours her life was about to change forever, all because of a joke from a man who had everything she had ever dreamed of. Elena had just finished her sandwich when her phone buzzed with a text message from Diane, the event coordinator. "Need help in reception room now, champagne spill." With a sigh, Elena grabbed her cleaning supplies and hurried toward the reception area. She had hoped to avoid the crowd of wealthy patrons, but duty called. As she approached the elegant room with its crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows, She could hear the gentle hum of conversation mixed with soft classical music playing through hidden speakers. She slipped in through the side entrance, keeping her head down. The room was filled with people in expensive evening wear, diamonds glittering at necks and wrists, the air heavy with perfume and cologne. Elena spotted the spill near one of the refreshment tables and made her way over, trying to be invisible. As she knelt to clean the puddle of champagne, careful conversations flowed around her. I heard he turned down Carnegie Hall twice this year. The waiting list for his master classes is 3 years long now. My daughter's piano teacher studied with him in Moscow, says he's brilliant but impossible. Elena kept her eyes on her work, but her ears were tuned to every mention of Viktor Kozlov. These people would soon be experiencing what she could only dream of, hearing him perform live, up close, with perfect seats. She had almost finished cleaning when the room suddenly hushed. Elena looked up to see Viktor Kozlov himself entering the reception, flanked by the hall director and several important-looking people. He moved through the crowd with the confidence of a man who knew his worth, nodding politely as people murmured greetings and compliments. Elena quickly gathered her cleaning supplies, hoping to escape before anyone noticed her. But as she stood up, she accidentally bumped into a waiter, causing the glasses on his tray to clink together loudly. Several heads turned, including Kozlov's. Their eyes met for just a moment. Elena froze, then looked away quickly, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She muttered an apology to the waiter and tried to make her exit, but Diane appeared, blocking her path. "Since you're here," Diane whispered, "can you stay and help the waitstaff?" 2 servers called in sick and were short-handed. Elena wanted to say no. Being around these people made her uncomfortable, their casual wealth, their easy confidence. But she needed the extra money, and Diane knew it. "Fine," she said quietly. "What do you need me to do?" 20 minutes later, Elena was circulating through the room with a tray of appetizers, still in her custodial uniform but with a black apron tied around her waist to make her look somewhat more like the other servers. She kept to the edges of the room, offering food to guests who barely glanced at her as they took tiny pastries from her tray. As she worked, she couldn't help watching Kozlov. He was the center of attention, surrounded by admirers hanging on his every word. The hall director was introducing him to various important guests, board members and donors whose generosity kept places like Thornfield Music Hall operating. "And this is Mr. Richardson, our newest board member," the director was saying as Elena passed nearby with her tray. "He's made a substantial donation toward our youth music program." "How wonderful," Kozlov replied, his Russian accent adding weight to his words. "The world always needs more musicians, yes, though perhaps fewer critics." This brought polite laughter from the group around him. Mr. Richardson, a round man with a booming voice, gestured toward the grand piano that stood in the corner of the reception room. "Perhaps we could persuade you to give us a small preview, maestro? Just a little taste before the main performance?" The others joined in with murmurs of encouragement, but Kozlov waved them away with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. No, you must buy the ticket to hear the music. That is how it works, yes?" More polite laughter followed. Elena continued her rounds, refilling her tray when it emptied and returning to the crowd. She found herself drawing closer to the piano, unable to resist its pull. It wasn't the main concert piano, of course. That was safely on stage, but it was still a beautiful instrument. She wondered how many of these wealthy guests could actually play, or if the piano was merely an expensive decoration to them. As she stood near the piano, lost in thought, she didn't notice Kozlov approaching until he was standing right beside her. He reached past her to set his empty glass on the piano's closed lid, and Elena stepped back quickly, nearly dropping her tray. "Sorry," she murmured automatically. Kozlov glanced at her, really seeing her for the first time. His eyes moved from her face to her uniform, taking in the Thornfield Music Hall logo embroidered on her shirt pocket. "You work here, yes? Not just for tonight?" he asked, his voice lower than when he had been speaking to the wealthy guests. "Yes, sir," Elena replied, surprised he was speaking to her at all. "I'm part of the custodial staff." He nodded slowly, then noticed her looking at the piano with what must have been obvious longing. A small, curious smile played at the corner of his mouth. "You like piano?" he asked. Elena hesitated. Yes, very much." Something in her tone must have caught his interest because he tilted his head slightly, studying her. Before he could say anything else, they were interrupted by the hall director. "Ah, Victor, there you are. The governor has just arrived and is very eager to meet you." Kozlov nodded, but before turning away, he gave Elena another curious glance. Then he was gone, swept back into the crowd of important people. Elena exhaled slowly, not realizing she had been holding her breath. That brief interaction had her heart racing. Viktor Kozlov had actually spoken to her, had asked her a question and waited for her answer. It was more than she had ever expected from this evening. She continued serving appetizers, but now she noticed Kozlov glancing her way occasionally as he chatted with various guests. It made her nervous, wondering what he was thinking. The reception was in full swing when the hall director clinked a spoon against his glass, calling for attention. The room gradually quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are so honored to have Maestro Kozlov with us this evening. In just 30 minutes, you'll all be enjoying his brilliant performance in our main hall. But first, a toast to our distinguished guest." Everyone raised their glasses. Elena stood back against the wall, watching as Kozlov nodded graciously to the applause that followed. As the toast concluded, Mr. Richardson's booming voice rose above the general conversation. "I still say we deserve a little preview, Maestro. Just a minute or two?" There were murmurs of agreement from the crowd. The hall director looked uncomfortable. Clearly, this hadn't been part of the plan, but Kozlov surprised everyone by smiling. "Perhaps you are right," he said, setting down his champagne glass. A small taste of what is to come. The crowd parted as he moved toward the piano. Elena held her breath as he sat down on the bench and lifted the cover from the keys. The room fell silent in anticipation, but instead of playing, Kozlov turned and looked directly at Elena, that same curious smile on his face. "But why should I play when we have other musicians among us?" he said, his eyes not leaving her face. "You there, girl. You like piano, you said. Perhaps you would play for us instead?" Elena felt the blood drain from her face as every head in the room turned toward her. The tray in her hand suddenly felt unbearably heavy. I'm working, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely audible. "Nonsense," Kozlov said, standing up from the bench and gesturing toward it. "I insist. Come show us what you can do." Elena stood frozen, aware of the confused and amused looks from the guests. The hall director stepped forward, clearly embarrassed. "Maestro, she's part of our custodial staff. I'm sure she doesn't. All the more interesting," Kozlov interrupted, his smile growing wider. He was enjoying this, Elena realized with a sinking feeling. It was a joke to him, putting the cleaning lady on the spot, watching her embarrass herself for the entertainment of these wealthy patrons. Someone took the tray from Elena's hands, one of the regular servers, looking at her with pity. Kozlov was still gesturing toward the piano bench, and now some of the guests were joining in, encouraging her with what seemed like genuine curiosity, mixed with the slightly cruel excitement of watching potential humiliation. "Go on," an older woman urged, her diamond necklace catching the light as she nodded encouragingly. "Don't be shy, dear." Elena looked around for Diane, hoping her boss would intervene, but Diane was nowhere to be seen. She was trapped in this moment with no graceful way out. Taking a deep breath, Elena slowly walked toward the piano. Her legs felt wooden, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. As she approached, Kozlov stepped aside with an exaggerated bow, his eyes glinting with amusement. He clearly expected her to fumble a few notes and provide a moment of awkward entertainment before the real show began. She sat down on the bench, feeling the smooth wood beneath her, so similar yet so different from her imagined playing on the concert hall piano the night before. The keys gleamed before her, perfect and white and intimidating. The room was utterly silent now, all eyes on her. Elena closed her eyes briefly, thinking of her grandmother, of the paper keyboard in her apartment, of all the hours she had spent watching pianists on this very stage, memorizing their finger movements, imagining the feel of the keys beneath her own hands. She opened her eyes, placed her hands on the keyboard, and took one final deep breath. What happened next would change her life forever. The room held its breath as Elena's fingers hovered over the keys. She could feel everyone watching, the wealthy patrons with their curious, slightly mocking smiles, the staff members frozen in place, and Viktor Kozlov himself, standing just a few feet away with that amused look still playing on his lips. For a moment, Elena considered simply standing up and walking away. She could quit her job tomorrow. She could move to another city. Anything would be better than this humiliation, but something kept her seated. Perhaps it was the memory of her grandmother saying she had a gift that must be shared. Perhaps it was 7 years of watching others play while she cleaned in silence. Or perhaps it was the smug look on Kozlov's face, the assumption that she, a mere cleaning lady, couldn't possibly know anything about music. Elena placed her fingers on the cool ivory keys. They felt both strange and familiar, like meeting an old friend after many years apart. She closed her eyes for just a second, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the reception room. She started softly, tentatively, her fingers remembering a piece she had never actually played on a real piano, but had practiced countless times on her paper keyboard and in her mind while watching others perform. For the first few measures, there were still smiles and raised eyebrows among the audience. This wasn't what they had expected. They had anticipated fumbling, perhaps Mary Had a Little Lamb or a simple scale. Not Chopin. Not a piece that even accomplished pianists approached with caution. Elena kept her eyes on the keys, too afraid to look up. Her technique wasn't perfect, how could it be? But what she lacked in formal training, she made up for in years of careful observation and a deep, intuitive understanding of the music. As the piece progressed, moving from its gentle opening to more complex passages, the smiles in the room faded. The gentle tinkling of glasses and whispered conversations completely stopped. All that existed was the music, sometimes delicate as raindrops, sometimes thundering like a storm. Elena played with her whole body, swaying slightly as the music demanded more emotion, more power. Her hands, which had spent years dusting and polishing, now flew across the keys with surprising agility. She had a few small fumbles, a missed note here, a slightly off timing there, but she played through them with the confidence of someone who understood that perfect technique was less important than conveying the heart of the music. As she reached the midpoint of the piece, where Chopin's composition turned stormy and dramatic, Elena finally dared to glance up. The faces looking back at her were transformed. Gone were the condescending smiles, replaced by expressions of pure astonishment. Several people had their hands over their mouths. An older man in the front had tears in his eyes, and Victor Kozlov, the great Victor Kozlov, stood with his arms crossed, his face unreadable except for the slight furrow between his eyebrows. He was studying her intensely as if trying to solve a puzzle. This brief look around the room gave Elena a sudden surge of confidence. She attacked the next section with renewed vigor, letting the music flow through her like electricity. Her grandmother had always told her that when you play with your heart, people can feel it. And for the first time, Elena knew this was true. She could feel the connection between herself, the piano, and everyone in the room. A magical thread of understanding that transcended words. As the piece neared its conclusion, building toward its final powerful chords, Elena felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. This moment, this was what she had dreamed of since she was a little girl sitting beside her grandmother at their old upright piano. Not the applause that might come after, not the recognition, but this perfect communion with the music. She played the final notes with everything she had, and then there was silence. A silence so complete you could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of traffic from outside. Elena's hands remained on the keys for a moment, and then she slowly lowered them to her lap. She kept her eyes down, suddenly afraid to look up, afraid of what might happen now that the spell of the music was broken. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats, 4, 5, then the room exploded with applause. People were standing, clapping with genuine enthusiasm, their faces showing shock, delight, and wonder in equal measure. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" from the back of the room. The hall director looked like he might faint. Elena finally raised her eyes to meet Victor Kozlov's gaze. The amusement was gone from his face, replaced by something much more complex, a mixture of surprise, respect, and, most surprisingly, shame. He knew what he had done. He had called her up to make a fool of her, to provide a moment of entertainment at her expense. Instead, she had shown everyone in the room that great music could come from the most unexpected places. As the applause continued, a woman pushed her way through the crowd toward the piano. She was tall and elegant, with silver-streaked dark hair and an air of authority that made people step aside for her. Elena recognized her as Isabella Montgomery, the director of the prestigious Westfield Conservatory of Music. She had seen her photograph in the hall's promotional materials for previous events. "My dear," Isabella said, her voice carrying despite the continuing applause, "that was extraordinary. Simply extraordinary. Where did you study?" Helena stood up from the piano bench, suddenly very aware of her custodial uniform and the fact that she didn't belong in this room of wealthy music patrons. I didn't," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the noise of the crowd. "My grandmother taught me when I was young, but our piano was sold when I was 16. I haven't played on a real instrument since then." Isabella's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose in disbelief. "You haven't touched a piano in how many years?" 16 years, Elena said quietly. "But I practice in other ways. I watch. I listen." Isabella opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Victor Kozlov stepped forward. The crowd quieted immediately, eager to hear what the maestro would say. "You play from the heart," he said to Elena, his accent thicker than before, as if emotion had brought it to the surface. "Technique, this can be taught. But to play with soul? This is rare gift." He turned to face the crowd, his posture straight and formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must apologize. I invited this young woman to play as a—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words, "as entertainment. I did not expect art. I did not expect music." He turned back to Elena. "It is I who have learned something tonight." The crowd murmured in surprise. Victor Kozlov was not known for humility. His apology was as unexpected as Elena's performance had been. "What is your name?" he asked her. "Elena. Elena Vasquez," she replied, still feeling as if she were in a dream. "Elena Vasquez," he repeated, then addressed the crowd again. "Remember this name." Isabella Montgomery stepped forward again, her eyes shining with excitement. "Ms. Vasquez, I would very much like to speak with you about your future. The Westfield Conservatory has a special scholarship program for exceptional talent, regardless of age or background. I believe you would be a perfect candidate." Elena's mind was spinning. "A scholarship? To Westfield?" It was too much to take in. The hall director, who had finally recovered from his shock, rushed forward. Yes, this is wonderful. But ladies and gentlemen, the main performance is about to begin. We must all proceed to the concert hall. Maestro Kozlov, we should get you backstage." As the crowd began to move, many people approached Elena, shaking her hand, asking questions she was too overwhelmed to properly answer. Diane appeared at her side, eyes wide with disbelief. "Elena, what just happened?" "I had no idea. Why didn't you ever say anything?" Elena shook her head, unable to find the words to explain. How could she have told anyone about her dreams when they had seemed so impossible? How could she have spoken of her love for the piano when she hadn't touched one in 16 years? As the room began to clear, Victor Kozlov approached her one last time. He studied her face for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Tomorrow," he said, placing the card in her hand. "Come to this address. We will talk about your music." Before she could respond, he was whisked away by his entourage, heading toward the stage door to prepare for his performance. Isabella Montgomery also pressed a card into Elena's hand, with promises to call her the next day to discuss the scholarship program. And then, suddenly, Elena was alone in the reception room, holding 2 business cards that represented everything she had ever dreamed of. The room that had been full of music and applause just moments ago was now silent again, with only the evidence of empty glasses and small plates to show that anything extraordinary had occurred. She sank back onto the piano bench, her legs weak with the enormity of what had just happened. Tentatively, she touched the keys again, playing a simple C major chord. The sound rang out clear and true in the empty room. "Thank you, Grandma," she whispered, tears finally spilling onto her cheeks. "You were right all along." Elena barely slept that night. She kept replaying the evening in her mind, the feel of the piano keys beneath her fingers, the stunned expressions on people's faces, Victor Kozlov's unexpected apology, and Isabella Montgomery's offer of a scholarship. It felt like a dream, but the 2 business cards on her bedside table proved it had really happened. She had stayed for Kozlov's performance, watching from the back of the hall where the staff sometimes stood when there were empty seats. His playing was everything she had expected, technically flawless, powerful, and moving. But now, instead of feeling the usual sense of longing and impossibility, Elena watched his hands with new eyes. not as something out of reach, but as something she might someday achieve herself. After his standing ovation, she had slipped out quietly and taken the late bus home, too overwhelmed to speak to anyone. The morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through her thin curtains. Elena sat up and immediately looked at the 2 business cards to reassure herself that yesterday had been real. She picked up Kozlov's card first. It was simple and elegant, with just his name and an address in the wealthy part of town. No phone number, no email, as if he were too important to be reached by ordinary means. The meeting was set for 2 o'clock, which gave her plenty of time to prepare. She had already called Diane early in the morning to ask for the day off. Diane had been surprisingly accommodating, still in shock from the previous night's events. "Take all the time you need," Diane had said. "And Elena, what you did last night was amazing, truly amazing." The second card was from Isabella Montgomery, with the embossed logo of the Westfield Conservatory of Music in the corner. Unlike Kozlov, she had written her personal cell phone number on the back with a note, "Call me tomorrow. Your talent deserves nurturing." Elena showered and stood before her small closet, suddenly worried about what to wear. She had never been to a wealthy neighborhood for a professional meeting. All she had were her work uniforms, a few casual outfits, and one simple black dress she had bought years ago for her grandmother's funeral. The black dress would have to do. She ironed it carefully and paired it with her only decent shoes, plain black flats that were a bit scuffed but still presentable. Looking in the mirror, she tried to see herself as others might. A 32-year-old woman with calloused hands from years of cleaning, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that held both determination and fear. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "You've been preparing your whole life." At noon, her phone rang, an unknown number. Elena answered nervously. "Hello, is this Elena Vasquez?" a warm female voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "This is Isabella Montgomery from Westfield Conservatory. I hope I'm not calling too early." "No, not at all," Elena said, sitting down on her bed. "I wanted to speak with you about what happened last night," Isabella continued. "I've been in music education for 30 years, Ms. Vasquez, and I have rarely been as surprised as I was by your performance. To play at that level without formal training, after such a long time away from an actual instrument, it's quite remarkable." "Thank you," Elena said quietly, not knowing what else to say. "I mentioned our scholarship program last night," Isabella went on. "It's designed for exceptional talents who haven't had traditional opportunities. We provide full tuition, a living stipend, and intensive one-on-one instruction with our faculty. I believe you would be a perfect candidate if you're interested." Elena's heart raced. "Yes, I'm very interested. Wonderful. There would be an audition process, of course, but after what I heard last night, I have no concerns about that. Could you come to the conservatory next Monday at 10? They spoke for a few more minutes, arranging details, and by the time Elena hung up, her hands were shaking with excitement. This was really happening. A chance at the life she had once dreamed of but had forced herself to forget. Around 1 o'clock, Elena left her apartment and took the bus to the wealthy neighborhood where Kozlov was staying. The address turned out to be a magnificent historic home that had been converted into luxury short-term apartments for visiting artists and dignitaries. A doorman in a crisp uniform looked at her, doubtfully, when she approached. "Can I help you, miss?" "I have an appointment with Victor Kozlov," Elena said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "My name is Elena Vasquez." The doorman's eyebrows rose slightly, but he checked a list on his desk. "Yes, I see you here. Top floor, apartment 501. The elevator is to your right." Elena thanked him and walked toward the elevator, feeling out of place among the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. As the elevator rose silently to the 5th floor, she took deep breaths, trying to calm her nerves. Apartment 501 had a polished wooden door with a discreet brass plaque. Elena knocked, and moments later the door was opened by a young man with glasses and a tablet in his hand. "Ms. Vasquez, I'm Pavel, Maestro Kozlov's assistant. Please come in. He's expecting you." The apartment was stunning. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the city, and elegant furniture that looked both expensive and uncomfortable. A gleaming black grand piano dominated the main room, positioned to take advantage of the natural light. And there, standing by the windows, was Victor Kozlov. He turned as she entered, studying her with the same intense gaze he had shown the night before. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, gesturing toward a seating area. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." Elena sat on the edge of an elegant armchair, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. Kozlov sat across from her while Pavel remained standing, tablet ready. "I must begin with apology," Kozlov said, his accent more pronounced in the quiet room. "Last night I behaved badly. I invited you to play as, how do you say, a joke. This was wrong of me." Elena nodded slightly but said nothing. "But then you played," he continued, leaning forward, "and I heard something rare. You have gift. Raw, unpolished, but real. Your technique needs work. Many years of work, but your understanding of music, of emotion, this cannot be taught." "Thank you," Elena said quietly. Kozlov waved away her thanks. "I have spoken with Isabella Montgomery this morning. She tells me you have opportunity for scholarship at Westfield. This is good, very good, but not enough." Elena looked at him in confusion. "Pavel," Kozlov said without looking at his assistant. "Bring the papers." Pavel handed him a folder, which Kozlov opened and placed on the coffee table between them. "I have teaching studio in New York. Not many students. I am very selective. But 3 times each year, I accept 1 student for private mentorship program. 6 months of intensive study." Elena's heart began to race again. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? Normally, candidates must audition many times, submit recordings, recommendations from other teachers. But sometimes, very rarely, I make exception. He pushed the folder toward her. "I would like you to be my student, Ms. Vasquez." Elena stared at the folder, unable to speak. Inside were papers describing the mentorship program, daily private lessons with Kozlov himself, access to practice facilities, even housing arrangements in New York. But why? She finally managed to ask. "There are so many talented pianists who have trained their whole lives. Why would you choose me?" Kozlov's expression softened slightly. "Because they have been taught to play like others. You play like yourself. They have technique but no soul. You have soul but no technique. Technique can be learned." He stood up suddenly and walked to the piano. "Come, play for me again. Something different this time." Elena joined him at the piano, still in a daze. "I don't have much repertoire," she admitted. "I've never had my own piano to practice on. I mostly play pieces I've memorized from watching others. Play whatever you know," he said, stepping back to give her room. She sat down at the bench, took a deep breath, and began to play Debussy's Claire de Lune, the piece she had been imagining when the security guard caught her near the piano the night before Kozlov's concert. This piano was even finer than the one in the reception room, responding to the lightest touch. Elena lost herself in the music, the gentle flowing notes painting a picture of moonlight on water. When she finished, Kozlov was nodding. "Yes, this confirms what I thought. You have natural musicality. Your hands, show me your hands." Elena held them out, suddenly conscious of their roughness. Years of cleaning had left them far from the elegant hands of a concert pianist. Kozlov took them in his, turning them over, examining the calluses and the strength in her fingers. "Strong hands, good. But we will need to work on flexibility, on technique." He released them and turned to Pavel. "Schedule Miss Vasquez for beginning of next program. 3 weeks from now." Elena's mind was spinning. 3 weeks? But my job, my apartment, I can't just leave. "All practical matters are covered in program," Kozlov said dismissively. "Housing, stipend for living expenses. You need only to focus on music." "But why are you doing this for me?" Elena asked, still not quite believing what was happening. Kozlov was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed. "Many years ago, when I was student in Moscow, my teacher took our class to small village for rural outreach concert. After we played, old woman approached with her granddaughter, a girl of maybe 10 years. The girl played for us on old out-of-tune piano. No training, just natural talent. My teacher recognized this gift, offered to arrange for girl to study at our school." He walked back to the window, looking out at the city. The family was poor. They could not relocate to Moscow. The offer was declined. I have often wondered what became of that girl, what music the world lost because opportunity did not exist. He turned back to Elena. "I cannot change past, but perhaps I can help shape future." Elena felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't let you down." "I know this," Kozlov said with unexpected gentleness. "Now we have much to discuss, many plans to make. Your new life begins today, Elena Vasquez. As they sat down to go through the details of the program, Elena thought of her grandmother and wished she could somehow know that her granddaughter's gift would finally be shared with the world, just as she had always believed it should be. 6 months later, Elena stood backstage at Thornfield Music Hall, her heart pounding in her chest. Through a small gap in the curtains, she could see the hall filling with people, a full house for tonight's special performance. The same stage where she had watched countless pianists perform while she cleaned the floors was now waiting for her. The past 6 months had been the most intense of Elena's life. After accepting Viktor Kozlov's offer to join his mentorship program in New York, everything had happened in a whirlwind. She had quit her cleaning job, packed up her small apartment, and said goodbye to the few friends she had made at Thornfield. "You'll always have a place here," Diane had told her warmly on her last day, "but I hope you never have to come back to clean." New York had been overwhelming at first. The noise, the pace, the sheer number of people rushing about their lives. The apartment provided by Kozlov's program was small but comfortable, located near the practice facilities where Elena would spend most of her waking hours, and those hours had been grueling. Kozlov had not exaggerated when he said she needed work on her technique. Her first official lesson with him had been a humbling experience. "No, no, no," he had exclaimed, stopping her just 8 measures into a Chopin piece. "Your hands, they are too stiff. You play like you are afraid piano will break. It will not break." He had made her start over, focusing on the most basic elements: hand position, finger strength, wrist flexibility. Hours of scales, arpeggios, and technical exercises. It was like learning to walk again after thinking she already knew how to run. There had been moments of frustration, even tears. Evenings when her hands ached so badly she couldn't hold a spoon to eat her dinner. Days when she wondered if she had made a mistake, if she was too old, if she had missed her chance to become the pianist she wanted to be. But Kozlov had been surprisingly patient, in his own demanding way. "Music is not just in fingers," he would tell her. "It is in mind and heart. Your heart knows music. We just teach fingers to follow." Gradually, painfully, her technique had improved. The hours of practice began to show results. Her fingers became more nimble, her understanding of the piano's mechanics more intuitive. And when she played the pieces she had loved for so long, Chopin, Debussy, Rachmaninoff, they began to sound more and more like the music she had always heard in her head. In addition to her lessons with Kozlov, Elena had attended classes at the conservatory, studying music theory, history, and composition. After years of isolation, she was suddenly surrounded by other musicians, most of them younger, but all of them passionate about music in the same way she was. She made friends, formed study groups, and for the first time in her life, felt like she belonged somewhere. Isabella Montgomery had taken a special interest in her progress, often inviting her for tea to discuss her studies and future plans. "You're what I always hoped the scholarship program would find," she had told Elena. "Someone with genuine talent who just needed the door opened." And now, 6 months after that life-changing night at Thornfield, Elena was back not as a cleaner, but as the featured performer in a special recital. Isabella and Kozlov had arranged it together, a homecoming concert to showcase her progress and to inspire others. 5 minutes. "Ms. Vasquez," a stagehand said, poking his head into the small room where Elena was preparing. She nodded, smoothing down the front of her simple black concert dress. Not the old funeral dress she had worn to meet Kozlov, but a new one designed for performance, with room for movement in the arms and shoulders. There was a knock at the door, and Viktor Kozlov entered, impeccable as always in his tuxedo. "Nervous?" he asked, though he clearly knew the answer. "Terrified," Elena admitted. "What if I make a mistake? What if they're disappointed?" Kozlov shook his head. "They will not be disappointed. You are not the same pianist you were 6 months ago, but more importantly, you are not playing for them tonight." "I'm not?" "No. Tonight you play for yourself. For the little girl who learned from her grandmother. For the woman who practiced on paper keyboard for 16 years. For the cleaner who watched others play and kept music in her heart." He placed a hand briefly on her shoulder, a rare gesture of affection from the usually reserved maestro. "The audience will hear what they hear, but the music is for you." Telena took a deep breath and nodded. He was right. Whatever happened on stage tonight, she had already achieved more than she had ever thought possible. Now, Kozlov said, returning to his more familiar, brisk tone, remember what we discussed about the Rachmaninoff. First movement, measure 38, do not rush. Let music breathe. I won't rush, Elena promised, smiling despite her nerves. A final knock on the door. 2 minutes, Ms. Vasquez. Kozlov gave her a small nod. You are ready, he said simply and left the room. Elena stood and did a few stretches to loosen her shoulders and arms. Then she walked to the wings of the stage, waiting for her cue. The hall lights dimmed, and a spotlight illuminated the gleaming grand piano center stage, the same Steinway she had once dusted so carefully, afraid to leave even a fingerprint on its polished surface. The audience quieted as the hall director stepped into the light. Ladies and gentlemen, Thornfield Music Hall is proud to present a very special recital tonight. 6 months ago, an extraordinary discovery was made within our very walls. A remarkable talent that had gone unnoticed and uncultivated. Tonight, after intensive study with Maestro Viktor Kozlov, we welcome her back, not as a member of our staff, but as an artist. Please join me in welcoming Elena Vasquez. The applause was warm as Elena walked onto the stage. She spotted familiar faces in the audience. Diane and some of her former co-workers seated in good seats near the front. Isabella Montgomery, elegant as always, in the third row. And scattered throughout the crowd, students from the conservatory who had come to support their unexpected classmate. Elena bowed briefly, then took her seat at the piano. She adjusted the bench, placed her hands in her lap, and took a moment to center herself. Then she raised her hands to the keys and began to play. Her program began with Debussy's Clair de Lune, a nod to those nights when she had imagined playing on this very stage. But this time it wasn't imagination. Her fingers moved with newfound confidence, bringing out nuances in the piece she had only dreamed of expressing before. The liquid notes flowed through the hall like moonlight itself. From there, she moved to Chopin, not the ballade she had played that fateful night, but a selection of his nocturnes, each one telling its own story of longing, joy, and quiet reflection. Her technique was transformed, her runs cleaner, her dynamics more controlled. But the soul that had stunned everyone 6 months ago was still there, even stronger now that it had the technical foundation to fully express itself. After a brief intermission, Elena returned for the most challenging piece of her program, the first movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Normally performed with an orchestra, tonight she would play a special arrangement for solo piano. It was a piece that Kozlov himself was known for, and his decision to include it in her program was a statement of his confidence in her abilities. As she began the famous opening chords, Elena thought of her journey, from the little girl practicing beside her grandmother, to the woman cleaning floors while others made music, to this moment, creating the sounds she had held in her heart for so long. Each note felt like both a memory and a new beginning. When the final notes of the Rachmaninoff faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted in applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very walls of Thornfield Music Hall. Elena stood and bowed, tears glistening in her eyes. She looked toward the wings where Kozlov stood watching, his arms crossed but with the smallest smile playing at the corner of his mouth. He gave her a single approving nod. As the applause continued, Elena realized that this was not the end of her journey but the beginning. There would be more concerts, more study, more growth. At 32, she was older than most pianists just starting their careers. But she had something they didn't. Years of holding music in her heart, waiting for this chance. For her encore, Elena had chosen a piece that wasn't on the printed program. As the audience settled back into their seats, she spoke for the first time. I'd like to dedicate this final piece to my grandmother, who first showed me the magic of music, and to everyone who has helped me on this unexpected journey. She began to play a piece she had written herself during her months of study. A simple, heartfelt melody that spoke of dreams deferred but not abandoned, of hope that persists even in difficult times. It wasn't technically complex, but it carried all the emotion of her story. As the last notes faded, Elena knew that whatever came next in her life, she would never again be separated from the music that had always lived inside her. The cleaning lady who had stunned a room with her unexpected talent had become the pianist she was always meant to be, and somewhere she liked to think her grandmother was smiling,